First of all, welcome, and I'm very happy to see so many of you today. In case anything is wrong, you don't hear me or Esther, please do notify us in the chat. I'm Helene van der Beek, and I'm the coordinator of SciComm Academy. And SciComm Academy, as you might know already, is an initiative by SciMingo. And SciMingo's mission is to support researchers to reach out by offering courses at a low cost in podcasting, popular science writing, video and pitching, and infographics. And there's still a few spots left for our spring edition, so you can always register on our website. And then there's the lectures like today. I'm very happy to introduce Esther to you today. I met her a couple of years ago in an inspiration session when I was slowly taking my first steps in science communication. And I've always remembered that session because of Esther's enthusiasm. Her official title is, if I'm correct, Senior Research Policy Advisor at Ghent University, where she focuses, amongst other things, on the societal impact of research. And obviously, one way she does that is by using social media in a successful manner. She will give her presentation first. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat. Esther will see whether she has to answer them immediately or not. At the end of the session, we have a Q&A moment anyways, so you can always keep your question until then or ask it, and then Esther will answer it at the end. And we would appreciate it if you have a question, if you're willing to put on the camera. I will make that possible at that time so that we can actually talk and see each other. Okay, Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helene, and hi everyone in a virtual space. And thank you for sharing your lunch session with me. I'm going to share my presentation, of course. Let's see, there we go. Birds of a feather tweet together. I'll be talking about using social media in your research communication strategy. And I'll be focusing on 3 parts. I only got 1 hour. I could talk about this the entire day. I could show many, many examples of the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media engagement. But I'll be focusing on 3 things today. So on the one hand, we'll try and develop some sort of social media attitude as a researcher. I'll talk about some tools of the trade and some tips to be aware of. And then we'll zoom in on using Twitter as a social medium for research, communication, and science outreach. Let's start. So first of all, your social media attitude. So maybe I should use this kind of disclaimer that because I'm giving you this kind of explanation, this kind of workshop, it's not my intention to get all of you on Twitter, to get all of you on social media. I just want to get researchers communicating about their research or about science as a whole. And it's up to you to find a medium that fits you, that fits your personality, that fits your type of research and your type of stakeholders as well. So one of the main things you need to think about is, are social media a platform that I want to use in my science outreach, in my research communication? If you are considering using social media, you need to think about some main attitude issues. So think about the discoverability of your research linked to open science and then fake news. And so this discoverability is essentially how discoverable, how easy do other people find it to find you or to find out about your expertise and to find out about your work, about the research that you're doing and all the outputs that you're generating. And remember, not just this accessibility or discoverability within an academic context. It is essentially trying to make sure that if you do have a research communication strategy, that this is actually working in practice as well, that the things that you write about, talk about, are available, are accessible, are discoverable for people out there wanting to find it. And this is very much tied into the idea that essentially we're all trying to create this open science environment. So an environment in which we follow the rules of science being based on, building on, reusing, openly criticizing the body of scientific knowledge already, because within science, and I guess my colleague Marianne Dohm in the previous session has also stressed this, the element of doubt, of revisiting theories, of looking again at everything you think is the truth, is a good way of advancing science. We need to keep reiterating certain questions and developing knowledge. And so one of these ideas is that science should be very open, should be accessible, not just towards your own peers, but also to society. And so considering how you can be more open as a scientist is an important question. And when I talk about open science, I'm not just talking about the technologies underlying the fact of open science. So things like having repositories that you can access, having things like social media, thinking about open access publications, all these kind of things are elements of open science, but it is also your attitude. It's the fact that your door is open to stakeholders, to outside influence when dealing with scientific questions. It is a state of mind, essentially, that you need to be aware of if you want to be good at research communication on social media as well. And of course, do we need to be on social media as researchers? Is this the place to be to celebrate open science? I was talking to Helene before I started, and I must say that sometimes I do question the fact whether social media are such a good thing for research communication. But I don't think we can think about communication without actually being on the platforms that are available. So we need to be out there as researchers spreading scientific facts, because the rise of fake news is really worrying. And so if we start dismissing certain types of media, certain types of platforms, because we don't think it's interesting enough, relevant enough, or even professional enough for us to communicate on, we are essentially dumbing down our own voice. We are stepping away from our own responsibility as researchers, trying to communicate what we know and what we know as scientific facts. But it is, I agree, it is an interesting environment that we now are faced with. How can we battle science myths and fake news, misinformation? Well, we can only battle this by being there, being available, and communicating in all kinds of ways. So the first step in creating a good social media attitude is being aware of the fact that open science is important, and that it's an attitude within yourself, not just a deal of open access publications and all kinds of fancy data repositories. It's also about the fact that you are within science with a door which is open to society, and that you make these efforts to make sure that the scientific facts are discoverable and accessible to all. Next step is, of course, because of all these platforms which are within the virtual, within the internet realm of things, you need to think about your own digital identity. And there are two concepts that are important when talking about digital identity. And so you need to consider your digital footprint. So on the one hand, your digital footprint is your active contribution to an interaction with the online world. These are the things you actively, knowingly are putting online. But on the other hand, there's your digital shadow, which is content about you, which is posted and uploaded by other people, as well as automatically generated or collated content. And so you should try to maximize your digital footprint and watch the digital shadow you're creating as well, because this digital shadow is really difficult to control. This is something, especially on the internet, you cannot control what other people are saying about you. So by being active in your own research communication online, you can kind of steer the idea that people get about you, about your expertise, and about the facts that you stand for. And so the best way to drown out content about yourself that you might not like is to upload things yourself that you have chosen actively yourself. And so one of the things that you need to do is not be paralyzed by your digital shadow, but just be aware that your shadow is created through your own identity, and that your identity is created by you by actively putting things online and thinking about this way of discovering the discoverability and accessibility of your own information. So how can you think about this? There's an excellent paper on this by some Australian colleagues, and they suggest by just first assessing yourself. So Google yourself. Everyone does it. There's no shame in it. So Google yourself, and maybe Google yourself from a computer that doesn't recognize you as being the main owner of that computer. So maybe log in anonymously, things like that. And just type in your name and see what comes up, because that's the best way to identify what your digital footprint is and what your digital shadow is. And that's the way to understand where you need to maximize your efforts. So assess yourself, invest in things such as an ORCID ID so that people can identify you uniquely and unambiguously. And next step is then deciding on your own profile. So what is it that drives you to create an online profile? What do you want people to think about you? And do you want to be out there because you're a scientist, or are you building your career? So make sure that the actions that you take online actually correspond with the kind of profile or character you want to portray online as well. That doesn't mean that you need to be really almost like a robot, just one dimensional. It is about being authentic as well, but it also drives a little bit of the strategy behind it, so that you're not just posting whatever you want, but thinking about how does this benefit the profile that I've decided on. And then the next step is, of course, fleshing out the profile by making sure that your outputs, all the things you do within research, are available. So think about using repositories that your university has. So make sure that you upload and register all the outputs that you generate, because that's what people will actually find if they search for you. And make sure that you do this through repositories of your own institution, or recognized repositories, because not all content online is accessible to everyone. Think about websites such as ResearchGate, which might seem very relevant, but at the same time are not an open community and are driven by a commercial product. So think about using the more open science-based platforms that you can use to make sure your outputs are available. And when you're putting your outputs out there, remember to include things that are kind of popular and informal resources as well. So you can use your repository not just to register your top level publications, but also think about teaching resources or materials that you use, or posters that you've created, things that are a bit more popularized or accessible to different types of audiences. And then you're ready to start communicating and interacting, because this is also fleshing out your profile. How you communicate and interact with the online community will also flavor how people think about you. So that was thinking about your digital identity as well before you start communicating through social media, so that you're thinking about this in a strategic kind of way. So the next step is, after thinking, what kind of a researcher am I? Am I an open scientist? Do I need to be here? Is it my responsibility to battle fake news and communicate? What is then essentially my digital identity? Where, on which platforms am I putting all my efforts, and what's my digital shadow doing? Next step is, of course, a kind of a general step that has to do with being a good communicator, is thinking about what is the impact of my research? What could the impact of my research be? And then communicating about your research in an impactful way through storytelling, for instance, all the while keeping track of the authenticity of your message and of your persona. So let's dive into that as well. Essentially, all of us, when we're doing research, well, most of us, they want to make a difference. We're in research because we're driven by curiosity, we're driven by the great challenges that our society faces, and we want to make a difference, however small it is. We want to provide a little piece of the puzzle towards a solution, an answer to issues that that we think about all the time as a society. So it's a good exercise to actually think about what might be the impact of my research. And it doesn't have to be groundbreaking or world changing. Maybe your impact through your own little PhD project might be changing the way that people within one street think about a certain topic. Or it might be creating this one little tool that changes the life of practitioners. So think about what the impact of your research might be. And even with fundamental research, think about how your research plays a part in the larger chain of things happening towards impact. Maybe your impact is on your peers that can take your solutions or your discoveries forward and be a part of the bigger impact in that way. And once you've identified what the impact of your research might be, how can you now then communicate about this, that it makes a difference with whoever's listening to you or that you're talking to? So how do you communicate with impact as well? And in that respect, many people are suggesting that the art of storytelling is actually making a difference in how we address science communication. So think about the idea that we as scientists often work the other way around from what the general public expects. So we talk about all the riveting details and all the nuances that are there, while most of our audiences just want one answer to their question. And this is quite a big challenge for us to tackle. And so storytelling, the idea that you use narrative techniques to tell your story, to tell your facts, is a big help, because it forces you to think about what is it that will resonate with other people? What's this central image that I can talk about, this point of connection that people will connect with, that essentially tells the story of the research that I'm doing, the importance, the impact, the relevance of the impact that I'm doing. And so that means that, in essence, once you start talking about your research, you need to start slow. You need to start with a small amount, small details, little bit of nuance, but not get caught up in this, and just keep focusing on the narrative. And the narrative is, in essence, such as all the narratives that we know, kind of an introduction, something that happens which drives, propels the story forward to come to some sort of resolution. And I know that for many of you, you don't even know what the resolution might be, but that's fine. People humans are geared towards storytelling. Our mind is geared toward this because we've been telling stories for ages now, for centuries. This is the way how we communicate information. And we can see this throughout our popular culture as well. So one of the typical techniques of storytelling is the hero's journey. You can be the hero as the researcher, but maybe it's the enzyme that you're researching, or maybe it's the tool that you're developing, which is the hero of the journey. But it's all about going on this trip, on this adventure, where you come across difficulties, but also you come across help. And this is very recognizable. Just think about all the superhero movies that are out there currently. They're all based on this hero's journey. And this is something that we look for in each story that someone tells us as well. So, what is the problem that you're facing? And how are you battling this? How do you come out on top as the hero of the story? Now, some people might confuse storytelling with just making everything more clickbaity. When you talk about your research, no, that's not the message I'm giving here. It's just that you're open to finding elements, metaphors, analogies, pictures that make the connection easier with your audience. And that means you need more than just one story, because you have more than just one audience. The people from TED Talks have made this wonderful infographic that I very often use, which really captures the idea of storytelling and makes it really relevant to so storytelling in social media. So you need to touch the heart first. You need to make this point of connection on an emotional level before you start bombarding your audience with all the logical, scientific facts. You need to create this connection so that they essentially trust you to take them further along the story. You need to show passion for your topic as well. Show them that you're a human, a researcher that cares about society and cares about their own topic within society. It must be a little bit unexpected. So it's always in science communication, there's always this element of trying to teach someone something so that they have this feeling that they need to share it with someone else as well. So once you've done your presentation or whatever, people need to pick up on things and say, this is something I want to talk about with my partner tonight when I see them at dinner. And you need to make it memorable. And making something memorable is by using the right storytelling technique, the right conversational topic, in the sense that you need to make it visual. And you need to remember this as well for when you start tweeting or doing Instagram or whatever social medium. This is a very visual medium, and this works really well. People want to get the visual connected to the more written text, because that makes our brain pick up this information a lot better and remember it a lot better. So think like Twitter, and we'll get back to that, of course, in our next slides. And then the final element in good storytelling, in having an impact with your research communication, is what Pixar itself says about telling a good story. What is it that feeds the story? What's the heart of your story? And so it's more than just the tricks of storytelling and finding a good visual. It's about being true to yourself and your science, being humble and being vulnerable, essentially being human. And that is why people will connect with whatever information you're sharing. And that is also why fake news has such a big success in reaching so many people, because it does a great job in making it personal, making it relatable, while it's not really authentic. So we need to use those kind of tips and tricks ourselves as well when we use them for science communication. So that's just the general idea of your attitude. Once you've got the attitude, you're ready for the next step, which is thinking about your network in outreach and thinking about which tools to use. So first of all, the network. It's important that, especially for social media, it's all about the network. It's all about amplifying your message through other people and their network. So you need to think about your network as a collection of people, but also a collection of knowledge, a collection of competencies and skills. And because you as a researcher, you're not superhuman, you cannot do everything yourself. So you need to find partners and experts within your own organization that might help you with your science communication by showing you how they got on social media and what they experience as their main pitfalls or little tips and tricks. You do not need to do everything yourself. You can also surf along on someone else's communication, because it ties into well, the fact that you're all trying to make a difference through science in society. So think about this multiplication effect that you can develop when you start out with things like a Twitter account. Think about, does our research group already have a Twitter account? How can we use that to amplify each other's message? Are there other people that are within the same topic that I can connect with, so that when I have a message, they put my message out there as well? So it's all about these meaningful encounters. And this is exactly the same as doing research, which is also about meaningful encounters. It's about picking up information from other people, collaborating, and the same goes for your communication strategy. So before you actually delve into all the types of communication you want to do, it is important that you do some sort of stakeholder analysis. So on a first level, you've got the stakeholders of your research. So remember again about the impact your research might have. Well, this is where your stakeholders reside. So who is it that will benefit from this piece of scientific knowledge, or who will use it to put it into practice or make policy around it? So who are the decision makers when it comes to your research and the research results? And who are the people that can collaborate on creating the knowledge? And this is not just your colleagues within academia, but also within society, who might have information or knowledge that might help coming to a better solution and create what we call socially robust knowledge. So think about your stakeholders. Also think about not just the beneficiaries, but the people that might not be so happy to see the results of your research, because understanding their critique, understanding their fears, which is often what they have, is a very good way to creating better communication, because you can actually talk to them in this storytelling kind of way, because you understand what they fear with your research or what they are worried about. So it's about understanding them in that way as well. So understanding the negative impact of your research as well. Once you've got a grip of who the stakeholders of your research and the impact of your research are, you can then step towards the communication strategy you need. So who are the publics, the audiences that we need to engage? Do we need to engage with certain people to push your message forward? These people are high impact publics that you really need to take care of. Or is it just enough to put my message out there and just let it live and hope that the general public does something with it? So it is essentially about having a strategy and making choices, because you cannot communicate on every level. So, and you only have 24 hours a day. So you need to make decisions about who you want to communicate to the most, because you think their collaboration, their engagement will have the biggest impact on your research impact. So it is essentially about building up this network, thinking about who needs to be part of my network, who might amplify my message, who can act as a mentor. Who do I really admire in their science communication? Talk to these people, ask them how they got into it, what they think are the biggest challenges, if they have any kind of tips and tricks. And that can really help you. And don't worry, most of the great examples of science communication are really approachable, because they think communication is important. They think public engagement is important. So they will also be open to helping you or setting you in the right direction. So think about this as well. And remember that a lot of social media are very easy and low threshold to connect with other people. Um, and so some of the barriers have really lowered since we have social media. It used to be that you, at a conference, you need to really be really brave and step up to a big speaker and ask them a question and kind of have a coffee with them. This is still possible, of course, but social media has made that kind of virtual coffee and virtual tips very easy as well, and made it a great opportunity. So take advantage of this as well. So essentially what I've been talking about now in that second part is, so by using things such as storytelling as a technique and caring about the network you're in and using that to your advantage as well, is a building block in being a great communicator. So it is important that you show your passion and that there's power in being personal, that you tell your story well, and that it's a right fit with your audience. But you also need to show that you're a leader in that kind of respect, while you're being part of a community of support. Because once you start communicating, as they say in Dutch, high trees take a lot of wind. That's essentially true. If you start communicating, you start putting yourself out there, and it's not always positive feedback that will come back your way. So you need to be part of a community of support, of a group of people that you think are in science communication for the same reasons that you are. Now, to switch to which kind of tools can we then use? There are, of course, these, when social media and internet started rising up, there were, of course, academia was very quick to take this on board. It's not just the military that's quick to take on board new technology. Academia is also a place where they see the potential. And so many academic social networks have popped up. These are just a few. But remember, these are academic social networks. If you're really wanting to make a difference with your research, you need to take this open science attitude and make sure that it's not just the peers that you engage with, but wider society and other stakeholders as well. So the next step is thinking about what kind of social networks are out there that we might use within research communication as well. There's this annual report done, it's called the Digimeter in Flanders, where researchers look into which types of social networks and social platforms are being used the most, by whom, and so on. So it is also part of your communication strategy. Don't start investing quite a lot of time and effort into a platform if your stakeholders are not there, if the audience you want to reach, the audience you want to interact with, is not there. And so you might say, you have to be clever about this, but at the same time, you need to think about that digital identity that you were building for yourself. So yes, Facebook is one of the biggest, but is this the place where your research communication will have the biggest impact? Or are people on that platform for other reasons? So it's about being informed before you start out. I'll be talking about Twitter because I've become convinced that this is a great social network to be on as a researcher, because you can kind of tie in both your personal and your professional persona in the same platform. It's really quick. You don't need a lot of technical savviness to do this. And some of the main stakeholders of research are there, such as the journalists, which is a network that can amplify your story. A lot of other researchers are out there, which is a good thing for collaborations. There's a lot of policymakers on there and bigger stakeholder groups as well. So it seems like a good fit, but of course there's many other possibilities as well. And these are some of the possibilities that you might consider. I'll just quickly go through some of them and talk about them. So, of course, you have the Facebooks of this world. Well, there's only one at the moment, but you need to see whether this is an actual fit. I think some of us will say that the algorithm that Facebook uses kind of takes away from the strategy that we as scientists might have to get a great reach with our information. So yeah, think about that. I have some great resources about this if you need some more information about this. There's a huge boom in platforms that are more geared towards the visual. And for some types of research, this is a gift from heaven. All of a sudden, you can talk about your research using beautiful visuals and things like Instagram or making these little videos to make it really interesting and relatable by using TikTok or other things like YouTube or Vimeo. And also the more static platforms such as blogging and adding your voice to a larger community of research information that way. Another one I wanted to kind of put out there is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the biggest non-academic referrer to scientific knowledge, and it's used, of course, worldwide. And I think it's one of our responsibilities as a scientific community to make sure that such an encyclopedia, which is being broadly used by the public, is scientifically correct. So consider doing a Wikipedia editathon with your research group and seeing whether all the state of play is actual and top of their game, and add to science communication in that way. There's also things such as, of course, podcasting, making explanations, infographics, putting them online, doing book reviews of these popularized versions of scientific books, being part of citizen science projects, which often have a online community around them. EOS, for instance, has this great website where you can find all the citizen science projects in Flanders and even in the bigger world as well. So iedereen wetenschapper, everyone's a scientist. These platforms such as I've got a question, ik heb een vraag, where you can very low threshold be part of a network that answers questions about science from the general public. So yeah, you've got Reddit, you've got TED conferences, you can even do science communication through your LinkedIn accounts because, for instance, if you're a researcher in economics, maybe your stakeholders will be businesses and they will more use LinkedIn than these other platforms. So it's worthwhile considering using one of those platforms in your science communication. And there's many out there. So essentially, there's no excuse not to engage in one way or the other. It's, of course, the important thing to choose the right tool for your specific goal, make it your own, and give it a natural place in your work and life so that it doesn't feel like this extra chore. And I think that is one of the main challenges. And that's why in these presentations, I always talk about the challenges as well. It isn't just this silver lining, fluffy pink clouds all the way in science communication. There are some issues that you need to take into account when you start communicating on social media. And so there's been some research done about this as well. It's very open If you make mistakes, everyone can see it, but hey, it's like making mistakes in other contexts. You just need to correct yourself and own up to your mistakes. That's fine. Yeah, you can have the best tweet ever and no one reads it. You're being ignored. That's life as well. It's kind of like this vicious cycle. If that stops you from communicating, of course, your message will not be picked up, because social media is very much an effort that you need to keep going if you want to really get the big impact that you're looking for. It doesn't just start with one tweet unless you're Taylor Swift or someone like that. You're just a common, ordinary researcher that needs to build up their name and their digital identity. There might be rules from your own university on how to tweet or how not to tweet. Um, well, in most of our universities, there aren't such rules, but it all comes down to common sense in most cases. And I'll give you some tips as well that are more kind of like guidelines rather than rules. But one of the biggest things is, of course, that it takes time. But every element of communication takes time. You need to put the time in if you want to get out of it what you really are looking for. And not all of us have the time to invest in these kind of endeavors. So it's essentially about making sure that you understand the challenges and make sure that the communication efforts that you do make, that they are part of who you are as a researcher, that it's part of how you work, so that it becomes a natural part of doing your research as well. And communicating is an essential part of doing research as well. So sometimes it comes down to using things that you are already doing, such as giving a presentation at a conference, presenting a poster, writing an article about something, turn it into something for a broader audience or for a specific stakeholder using a platform such as social media. Of course, once you start putting things online, remember there are things such as copyright and plagiarism. Ethical rules don't go out the window once you start communicating and going online as well. Now, some of you might think, well, is this is it worth it doing all this? Will it make sure that I get promoted quicker and so on? The short answer is, if you're doing this to have a higher H index or things like that, don't, because these are separate levels of impact. Everything you do in your communication might correlate to your scientific impact, but the two do not correspond in a meaningful way, in a, I should say, cause and effect kind of way. But we do see that highly tweeted articles are 11 times more likely to be highly cited, but that's often because of what they represent, these articles as well. And just remember that the factors driving social media and driving citations are different. So social media cannot be seen as an alternative to citations, because you cannot overcome the citation time lag, so the delay as well. And also remember that it's not because you tweet a lot or you get invited a lot to media appearances that you're having an impact. You're getting reach, you're getting attention, but that in itself is not yet the impact. Because the impact is something which is, it can be along the way. Are people changing their attitude towards something because you talked about something or tweeted about something? This is an intricate and very complex evaluation. But that doesn't mean that you don't need reach and attention to get to the impact, but just don't confuse both of them. And so we're seeing the rise of things called alt metrics or next generation metrics, because of course within academia we like to measure and count all kinds of things. And so people are now starting to count the reach and attention that your online presence and your online outreach is gaining as well. I'll just kind of sum up what you need to take away from considering doing outreach through social media before we turn in the final 10 minutes, 15 minutes to Twitter specifically. So be honest about what you want to achieve by engaging with social media. Is it part of your communication, your outreach, your impact strategy? Because as a researcher, you need to think about these things. You need to think about what is the impact I want to have with my research? And it doesn't have to be you specifically, individually. It can be part of a group effort as well. What is the impact my research group wants to have on society? And does engaging through social media have a place within this strategy? Consider producing the content to use on social media as a normal part of your working life. If it always feels like something that is being added to what you need to do, you will not keep it up. I'm sure of that. You need to feel comfortable and at ease within social media to to see the potential within the content that you already produce, to reuse it within social media. Make sure that you know that there are advantages and disadvantages to every platform, to every type of communication. Be realistic with the time you have and know who can help you. It's not that everyone will find a minion to tweet for them. Some of us do. Remember that the authenticity of your voice is still very much important. But get some information from people that you admire or people that are around you. Just call on your network to amplify your message. Be aware of your digital footprint and invest in visibility. Once you've decided that you're going to join social media for your science outreach, make sure that people can find it easily. Put it in your signature, in your email, put it on your name tag when you go to a conference, so that people will actually find the platforms, your accounts on these platforms that you're engaging on. And get your story and timing right. When the whole world, let's just say when the entire Flemish media is talking about your topic, don't sit back and wait. Just interact and see what happens. But know your story in advance. What is the story that you're going to tell? Don't just interact without being prepared, because people will notice and you'll feel kind of frustrated with what happened during your outreach. And it's all about finding a balance in these things, but also have some fun, people. It should be fun to communicate and interact through social media or any kind of medium. And so keep it fun and keep it lighthearted as well, while still being part of the scientific community, sharing scientific facts. So let's have a look for the final 10 minutes. A look at Twitter, which is my weapon of choice. I've been tweeting since 2012, mainly through a institutional account, which is research, Ghent University Research. And I've also got my personal account, which is different. That's my personal account. But most of you, if you're a researcher, don't go kind of do this schizophrenic thing and have a science account and a personal account. Twitter is all about blending the two of them. But that also means that sometimes some messages you will not put forward and other messages you need to put forward. So these are some of my experiences and tips that I want to share with you as well. So why Twitter? Because I think it's such an easy medium that combines so many different goals. It's a great place to learn how to write succinctly, short and snappy. There are some benefits, so you can connect with peers, you can build up a scholarly network. It's about finding and sharing resources, so adding to the open science idea. It's a great place to generate and refine ideas. It's like this big beehive that you can just float an idea in and see what happens. It's of course reputation management. It's building up that digital identity. It's for disseminating your research essentially. But remember, these platforms are not just about broadcasting how amazing you are. Remember that you need to use that storytelling idea. So if you've got a new paper, don't just tweet the new paper with this difficult scientific title, but already kind of make a little summary or this little teaser that tells your stakeholders, that talks to them and tells them what it is essentially about, so that they are willing to look at that article as well. But also remember that tweeting scientific articles is mainly something you do to have an impact in your own scientific community, because none of these other people like journalists or policymakers will start reading a scientific paper. And make sure that if you tweet it, it's open access so that they can actually read it and access it as well. It's a great place for professional development. You can find all sorts of tips and register for workshops. And maybe you found this thing on Twitter as well, so that you can join us. And it's also a great way to kind of test the waters of career opportunities. You'll see job openings quicker on Twitter than that you can check all the websites of all the universities you would like to work at. Especially because it's within a network. It's people suggesting this to you because they think it's an interesting item within your network. And it also shows you how people feel and think about the place that they work. So it might give you an indication whether a certain research group you want to work at is a great research group. And of course, it's a great place for getting involvement, creating public engagement, and getting the media to pick up whatever you're doing. There's also a social element to it, especially for junior researcher. It sometimes breaks isolation. It's a good way to look over the fence. So for interdisciplinarity, you can find some fellow victims that are struggling with their PhD. And it shows you the real life of scholars as well. So some some feedback, some reviews from people that are on Twitter. You'll get the presentation as well, so you can read up on this as well. There's also a big search in the science of Twitter. So what's the best way to tweet in a scientific way? So it's you have to work towards 1,000 followers if you want to have some kind of impact. So some of these things are very interesting to take into account, but at the same time, you need to think about this in a pragmatic way as well. If you like reaching out through Twitter, just do it and don't have all the science keep you back. But it is, of course, evidence-based or policy or scientifically informed is always a good thing to do your to evaluate what you're doing. So why are people on Twitter? Also some research being done about this, to follow discussions, to post their own content, to comment on research, discover peers, things like that. Yes, of course, it's also to gossip about people, but please don't. It's to interact with people you have an intellectual crush on. But just remember that, most people are on there to not just for the information, but for the interaction as well. Some tips about tweeting. So start out with your bio and the pictures related to your bio. Make sure that you have a look at the settings. So making sure that, so for instance, your location, things like privacy settings and other things like that. And so for the bio, think about these elements to put in there. Just make sure it's all about management of expectations. People need to really understand why you're there and what they can expect from you. Choose an app. So I've got different apps. I've got TweetDeck, I've got the Twitter app. Find the one that suits you best. And next step is starting to follow and listen. So if you don't really want to put your voice out there immediately, it's fine. Just follow, listen, see what's the dynamics are and who's tweeting about what. And then you can start tweeting yourself and engaging. If you don't engage, you will probably not get out of a social medium what you can get out of it. So remember that. Yeah, you can still change whatever you've created in a past life. So yes, do that. It's a good way to maybe be a bit more professional with your account. Change your bio again. So yeah, you can still log in and change some of the settings and some of the ID information as well. Let's see. And then tweeting is just going to put it out there. It's quite easy. You just start typing a tweet and you can put in a picture, a GIF. Don't overdo it with GIFs, please. You can put in a poll, emojis, you can schedule your tweet. You can make sure that you've got a whole thread of tweets, so that put a line between the tweets so that you can have a whole conversation. But remember, Twitter is still a short and snappy medium. It should stay like that. I'm one of the old school people in this. Don't go ranting. Write a blog if you want to rant or write a whole story. So if you do tweet, make sure that you've got layered tweets, thick tweets. So mention something. I'm just going to put this on there. So you can mention people. That's by posting the handle of another account. Have a look at hashtags that you can use. Maybe there's a thematic hashtag such as SciComm, or there's a hashtag for the event that you're at. Just make sure that all these things are in there. And then there's some other buttons that you can use. You can reply to someone. You can retweet something. You can like something. And you can even do the analytics to see whether your tweet had a great reach. And then some extra menus as well. Yes, you can delete your tweet. Sometimes if you do that quickly, that's fine. Sometimes it draws more attention to the fact that you've deleted a tweet. You cannot edit a tweet, and I think that's a good thing. You just need to think before you write. That's what we do when we talk as well. Don't just put your foot in it, just think, but don't overthink it. I know it's difficult, but it's all about balancing the act. If you want to retweet something, my tip would be, if you really want to build up a network, if you really want to engage with your stakeholders, make sure you add a comment. This gives people an indication of why you felt the need to retweet this information, why you thought that this was interesting. And so the original tweet will still be posted as well. But things like this happen as well, so that you just see text, this whole flurry of text. That's because, remember this as well, people will first read the thing that you're retweeting. So if you're retweeting something because you disagree, people will probably first see the thing you disagree with, but don't know that you disagree with it. So remember that when you're starting to post things, that people's eye will be drawn to whatever you've retweeted. This is how you do threads. So you see this little gray line linking several tweets to each other so that you can create a story. And maybe you know about this competition thesis thread where people were asked to tweet about their research in a maximum of 20 tweets. So that was a great one. You should have a look at Hannes, his thesis thread. And then you can see this nice line so that you get a whole story. Right, so when is the best time to tweet? They don't know. It all depends on your network, on your audience. So I know that my followers are most active between those hours. So that's when I tweet. So I'll tweet in the morning because I know that they'll probably be checking the news, and Twitter is often a source of news as well. I'll tweet around lunchtime because people are unfortunately sitting down behind their desk and eating something and going through Twitter. And I used to tweet during the weekends because I knew that people were then preparing grant proposals and things like that. But Life-work balance has made sure that I don't do that anymore. So it all depends. But there is no single best time that works for everyone. And especially when you're in an international network, people are all over the place when it comes to timelines, time zones. You can schedule a tweet, but make sure that nothing happens in between that makes the tweet inappropriate. All right. So for instance, this is what the University of Leicester did. They tweeted about Leicester Cathedral and the remains of Richard III, but they tweeted it at the time when they were sacking all the Middle English language and literature experts that worked on that project. So think about these things in advance. The basics, think about the 30-70 rule times 2. That means 30% of the time, you need to be tweeting about something original, something that is your voice. 70% of the time, you can just tweet, retweet stuff or comment on something. 70% of the time, you need to tweet about what your bio says you'll be tweeting about. 30% of the time, you can just be you. You can tweet about the Eurovision Song Contest, that's fine. But you need to have that in balance. Thick tweets, as I mentioned, make sure that there's links in there, hashtags, visuals, mentions, and so on. And make sure that if you do tweets and you want people to do something with your tweet, make sure it's an engaging tweet. So PE, public engagement tweet, call to action. That's what people respond to on social media. Hashtags, remember a hashtag expands the reach that you have, because people might not follow you, but they might follow a hashtag. And because of that hashtag added to your tweet, you might get on their radar as well. It might backfire. So we tweeted about some research from one of our professors who does research on medieval nuns. Well, we got into sexy nuns news because we used the word nuns. But that's great. That's a good example for using in a workshop. And remember, visuals rule. So if you put photos in there or videos or nice images, it boosts your impressions. But remember, if you do use pictures, if you use pictures from people, make sure that people are okay with the fact that they're being used. And think about copyright as well. There's a lot of Creative Commons licenses out there so that you can tweet about things that are able to be tweeted about. Try to avoid mistakes, but if they happen, they happen. Correct them if they happen. All right. I'm not going to talk about lists. So this gives you an overview of one of our professors who tweets, who uses Twitter as a science communication tool, and he tweets about almost everything to do with his research. He interacts. He tweets in both languages. He interacts with, for instance, even with Telenet, because Telenet has made a data visualization that wasn't really scientifically correct. Things like that. He becomes even quite personal, talking about his children and making these Lego scapes. So this is how you can do it, but the main tip is do things that you feel comfortable with. So here are some examples of all the things that might happen if you tweet. So you might be picked up by the Minister for Science. That's always a nice thing to happen. Well, in this case, it's the Minister for Education, but still, it was a nice thing to happen. You can reach out to people looking for certain research infrastructure. You can start conversations. I really like engaging on Twitter with people. So to sum up, if Twitter is something for you, determine a strategy and try to stick to it, because it's all about management of expectations. Maybe you need to dedicate some time to tweeting during the day. Don't have this hovering over you as a constant pressure, but think, I'll tweet, I'll have a look at Twitter in the morning and I have a look at Twitter in the evening. And the things that I've missed, that's fine. There's no fear of missing out. I'll engage when it's interesting to me. But make sure that if you do tweet, that it matches your bio and your content, and your activity needs to match all this. So if you're on there because you want to be known as a researcher, you want to be known as an expert in your field, 70% of the time you need to be tweeting about these things, because otherwise people will get confused and not know why you're there. And try to tweet consistently as well. If you only tweet once every 2 months, well, people will maybe not pick up on you, but if you tweet every day, that might be too much. So try and find this rhythm that you feel comfortable with, while still being aware of current events happening. So if everyone's talking about your topic, maybe it's the time to jump in. Thick tweets, and according to the rules, things like don't start a tweet with a mention, because then only the people following you and following the person that you've mentioned will see the tweet, things like that. Don't use hashtags and mentions in the wrong way, and try to build up a network and include some influencers. Don't stalk these people, but sometimes it's a good idea to mention them or follow them, so that you've put yourself on that radar. And if you tweet about things that are relevant to them, they might retweet you, and their network will pick up on your message as well, and you'll gain followers that way as well. It is not about quantity, it is about quality. I know that sounds really stupid, but it is like that. Do the things that you feel comfortable with, and it's not about having 10,000 followers that do shit with your tweets, right? It's about the ones that actually do something for you and make you feel that you're in a good supportive community, a good supportive network. It's a social medium, so if you don't interact, you'll probably not get out of it what you might get out of it. That doesn't mean it's not okay just to lurk, to hang out on Twitter and see what everyone is talking about. But that will not be the way that people will find you if you don't put things on there yourself, or don't interact. And then very importantly, especially in these times, be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not. Be cleverer than you are. Be nice. It's no use engaging with trolls, but it's no use creating trolls by being this really annoying person. Don't be this typical academic that goes around correcting everyone. There's ways to do this. So think about your attitude. Think about how you interact with people. It's not because it's a social medium that all niceties go out the window. Think about research integrity as well. Don't use information from other colleagues. Don't take credit for things that aren't yours. And use common sense. If you have a little doubt niggling in your mind about a certain thing you want to do, it's probably not a good idea. But it's okay. Everyone gets one mistake a year. I do too. And that will often tell you what not to do in the future. And of course, I have to be honest, Twitter is a bubble. You are communicating, interacting with people within a bubble. And sometimes you need to remember that, once again, that you are within a bubble, and that there's people that think in other ways about what you do, and that you need to find ways to interact with those people as well. Voila, that was in a nutshell what your attitude should be like once you want to go on social media. What are the things that you need to think about, like stakeholder analysis, communication strategies, the tools you're using, storytelling, and then some of the platforms that you can interact on, and some tips on Twitter. So I thank you for being here. If you read only one article, read this one. It's very good. It's about science communication, and it makes you consider all the elements that I talked about as well. Voila, and I look forward to taking questions in this Q&A.
Thank you so much, Esther. We do have some time left for questions, and I saw some questions in the chat. Now, I will make you, if you ask the question, I will try and make you a panelist so that we can turn on your video. In the meantime, maybe I can drop one question myself, Esther. As a researcher, people are used to being as neutral as possible. But at the same time, we're human beings and we have, let's say, expert opinions in this case. What do you think about that? How do we cope with that? And how much opinion can you put in a tweet?
It's a good question, and it's something that doesn't have a straight answer. So that's the nuance that you're looking for. It depends what the profile is that you've decided on. If you really want to be the voice of reason, the neutral scientific expert, it's something that you need to keep up. And that's not easy because, well, that means that you need to stick to the things that you know and the things that are within your realm of research. But at the same time, it's important that researchers don't always hide within their own little discipline, because that might offer too little opportunities to actually communicate, because some people have research areas that are so narrow, but they are still representatives of the scientific community. So they should still be able to communicate about how science works, why science is important in society, things like that. One of the elements then, of course, is not just your opinion, but also your activism. How far do you want to go? Where does the researcher end and the activist, the individual, begin? Unfortunately, this is something you need to find out. Some people are very much are even trying to keep themselves back in a lot of statements they want to make, although they have scientific knowledge about a topic that is being discussed. So sometimes step outside your comfort zone, but do only the things that you feel comfortable with. And not everyone wants to be the activist. Just remember that on certain topics, not everyone will agree with you. And then it's an issue of having a good conversation. And that sometimes means taking it outside Twitter, not just keep communicating in these one sentences to each other, but saying, see, some of the things you're saying really make sense, or I want to know more about. Let's have this conversation offline, or have an email conversation. So it's you're a human being, so you need to find out what the comfortable situation for you is, but sometimes push your own boundaries, because that's often where the magic happens. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There are some other questions in the chat asked by people who prefer not to put on their camera, so I'll read them out loud. A first question was that the time investment needed is a challenge because sponsors usually do not finance this. Do you have any advice on which tools are most cost efficient or yield the best return?
Well, it is true. One of the things I need to agree with is that, especially for science communication or any other type of societal value creation of your research, not a lot of funders will dedicate money to this. Although sometimes we need to turn it around, and you need to push that limit as well and factor it in your research budgets so that you do have money for things like this. But of course, the things that I'm talking about, like social media such as Twitter, these are things that you do yourself. And that's also the main impact, because it's your voice, it's your authenticity. It's not something you can delegate to someone else. Now, there are some of these tools that make you link up all your social media accounts, so that if you post one message, it sends it out to all the different platforms. I do not use those, because every social media platform has their own rules, their own types of unwritten rules, even the things that how you tweet about something, how you put a Facebook post together, how you use hashtags on Instagram is a little bit more different than how you do it on Twitter. So I don't use any type of those things. My most cost efficient tip is make a choice. You don't have to be everywhere engaging on every social platform. I just choose one and it works best for me. Also think about the way that we are now also changing academia a bit more, which is we're stepping away from assessment on the individual level, but looking more at group efforts. So have this conversation within your research group and ask, how are we going to deal with our communication strategy? Who feels up to having a Twitter account? Who wants to do something on Instagram? Find the people with talent for certain platforms and have them create content based on the group effort. So that would be my tip. There are no magical applications that can make this cost efficient. It's all about how much time you want to spend on it, and if it works within what you need to be doing each day. And it fluctuates. I used to be very intensive on Twitter. When I walked around the city, everything I saw was a tweet in my head. No, you have to go back to your strategy. When is it the most important time to interact? Who needs to be doing this? What's the message that needs to go out, and which platform speaks to my stakeholders best? And that's where you need to be. So that's the efficiency exercise.
Balance once again.
Yes, I know. It's becoming tiresome, I know, but it is a balancing act. And sometimes reaching those limits and finding out that it's a limit, that you cannot combine it all. Yeah.
Okay, I saw two a little more practical questions that I'd also like to read out loud. Someone is writing, I made an account a long time ago and just chose a handle, which I now realize is a bit unattractive. Can I still change this?
Yeah, you can change it. Just be aware that sometimes you need to make your network aware that you're doing this, so that it happens automatically. But you mustn't forget that we are very much these herd animals, and that we become used to a certain avatar or a certain Twitter handle. It's almost automatic that we screen, because there's so many tweets, that we screen on what we know. So it's always a good way to say, look, I've changed this. Don't worry, it's still me. So that people, so that your customers, your audience is aware as well. But you can still change it, yes.
And then the last one so far, if anyone else has a question, now is the time. Sophie writes, I just saw a message of Twitter about a professional account. Is this something good to do, and what are the advantages?
Well, maybe I should just come out clean and say, I use Twitter in a very low-tech kind of way. Twitter can do so much more than what I've just talked about, but what I'm using is enough to do what I need to do, and to still have this idea that I'm having an impact. So yes, they're developing all kinds of stuff. I also know that you can share with an entire group. You can share your account and log in with different people and things like that. The professional account, I haven't got that message yet. It's fine. I'll have a look at it. But again, I want to reaffirm that, especially for research communication, we see the biggest impact if you just the human researcher that has different. We all have different roles in our life that we need to balance and combine. This is what speaks to people. Professional accounts, so for instance, like business accounts, they only work when there's this feeling that there's a human behind it as well. Because if you start tweeting so neutrally or so broadcastingly, people will think this is not there's no one really engaging with this. They're just in it for themselves. They just want to do PR. They don't even want interaction. So I wouldn't go all the way professional. It is the big added value that you can combine all the roles in Twitter.
Okay. Thank you so much, Esther. That was the last question, and it's about time for us to wrap up. So thank you once again, everybody who was here, and everyone else. If you know some interested colleagues, can watch this lecture on YouTube within a couple of hours on our YouTube channel. We also have a couple of other lectures coming up about some of the topics that were mentioned in this lecture as well, like storytelling. Simon Adler will speak about that, but we also have stand-up comedian and Washington Post journalist Kasia Patel, Tycho van Houwaard, who will discuss how to influence decision makers, and a couple more. So you can check them on our website. You could also subscribe to the newsletter, which I shared in the chat. And of course, there are our courses, but you can find all of that online. So thank you very much also all of you for being here, and Esther for the talk. And maybe see you next time.